He's a humble man. He's a determined man. He's a fat man. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week, I plan to bring you in-depth insight into the creative process of storytelling. No, I'm not talking about myself. I'm talking about the Santa Claus movie, Fatman. And today, we have our guests, Ian and Eshom Nelms, with us, who are the co-writers and co-directors of this film. They've been in the podcast before. In fact, they are even podcast listeners previously who had made it to the stage with their last film, Small Town Crime. And it's a pleasure to have them back. So I hope just on that alone, you will give their film a chance and seek out the latest film from these indie filmmakers who were once podcast listeners just like you before they were listening in. And, during the pandemic, we're not even just podcasting. We've set up a Backstory Magazine YouTube page where you could watch all these interviews. That's right. You could watch the amazing Zoom of talking heads. You could see us talk. But look, Fatman is a very strange movie indeed. They were bucking the genre in many different ways, and I respect them for that. And, the Nelms brothers were very good about talking about their creative process and actually what it took to do their film during the pandemic, because they, as they explain later, they were shooting it right until literally lockdown happened. So their entire post was during the pandemic. They got really lucky in that respect that they didn't have to stop shooting. And as they say, they might not have really finished their film based on all the elements they needed to get together to make it happen. So they were very forthcoming about their creative process, and I know you will dig this episode. And speaking of things to dig, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. That's right, folks. It's my passion project. Doing it during a pandemic is very difficult, so your support would be greatly appreciated. We're really getting ready to publish issue 42. I now am in a position where I owe a couple articles to the magazine. I'm tempted to put it out with my articles to float in after it's out, because as a digital magazine, I could do that. But I want to try and get it as together as I can because we've been waiting long enough. But yeah, bit sleep deprived right now, but your support would be amazing. If it makes it easier for you to become a Backstory subscriber, I'm happy to offer you discount code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5. You could use it over at backstory.net. Remember, you can read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. But you can only use the discount code on backstory.net. And if you do that, you will still be able to get, your login credentials will still work on the iPad. I know it sounds complicated, but look, thanks for considering supporting us. It'll mean a lot to myself and all my creative collaborators over there at Backstory. But now let's jump right into our conversation with Ian and Eshom Nelms, the Nelms brothers, the co-writers and directors of this fine film about their latest film, Fatman. Okay, Ian and Eshom, it's good to see you guys. How you doing over there?
Good to see you, man. How you been?
You're not socially distanced, young man. You're worrying me. I'm getting nervous.
We've been on top of each other since we came back from the pandemic. We literally wrapped the day before they shut all the productions down in Canada. So they wrapped
on this film.
Yeah, then we wrapped.
Oh, wow.
We shut it down, and then we flew home 2 or 3 days later. Yeah.
And then we were editing. Yeah, we edited the film in Ian's basement.
So we spent.
Okay, wait. You're skipping ahead. You're skipping ahead. Damn it! I want to hear all this about what it's like to do that. But it's good to see you guys. Last time we had you in the screening series and the podcast, it was for Small Town Crime, and I just want to know, looking back, but before we get to that, actually, what just for a baseline for any of our listeners that didn't hear that episode, give us your very brief breaking in story, because they could hear the longer version in that episode, but just to catch people up that maybe didn't hear that episode, brief breaking in story.
Brief breaking in. All right, how to be concise. All right, so we started off, moved to LA, made a bunch of renegade independent films, social, like with money that we got from a car wreck. So I was rear-ended. We bought a camera. We made a bunch of renegade independent movies.
That was my favorite part of the story.
Like
hear that, kids? If you want to make movies, always get in a car wreck.
Exactly. It's a good start.
So, and then we made one called Night of the Dog, and that ended up getting attention from like Focus Features, and we got a manager out of that. And then from there, we got representation. We started writing a bunch of screenplays for about 5 years. Finally got one made independently. So we self-financed along with raising money from a lot of different sources, called Lost on Purpose. And then that was about...
That kind of started everything. So we went from Lost on Purpose to, we got into a bunch of film festivals, won a bunch of film festivals, but people were seeing it, and then a person saw it that had about $500,000 in the rights to a book that she was trying to get this film done. And she obviously it was too big for what she had. And so she came to us and she said, "Hey, how much did you make that movie for?" And we made it for about 200 grand. And we had a lot of names and faces and a lot of scope. And so she said, "Well, read this book and read this script that I have that I've sort of developed at different companies. It's about a $20 million rom-com right now, but I'd love to see if we could do it for $500,000. So we read it, read the script, said, "I think, can we take this approach?" And she liked the approach. And so that's how Waffle Street came about. And then after Waffle Street, a couple of those same producers said, "Great experience. What else have you got?" We said, "We've got these crime thrillers,"
which we'd been writing for like 5 years, but hadn't had the opportunity to make one yet.
And they said, "We've got some financiers. If you guys have a script you want to do, give it to us. We'll pass it to them." We did. We gave them Small Town Crime. They were like, "All right, this is awesome. We'll finance it, but you got to find some talent." And that's when we reached out to Octavia Spencer and started talking to her about it. And she loved it and came in and helped us out. And from that, we were able to really see. We had Fatman for about 14 years.
Really? That long?
Yeah. We had it the whole time. We're writing all these smaller projects.
It's one of those projects we were trying to get to make. We're trying to get up there to make it because it was just out of our scope. And
people would say, one of these days someone's going to make this. I don't know if it's going to be
such a batshit crazy script. Like, it's great, but I like the tone. It's so specific that you're going to have to do something that shows you can do this tone.
Right.
So a lot of things here. And we said, okay. And when we did Small Town Crime, we were actually going into meetings saying, "Hey, it's that tone. That's the tone right there. It's in that film." And so that's how we got it made.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That was very concise. Very good wrap up.
We tried.
Yeah.
What I love about you guys is you were podcast listeners that also made it into the screening series, which is always good to have. And tell us, just like looking back, you've heard me ask this question a million times. What was your biggest lesson looking back now a few years later from Small Town Crime? What was something that, like, now you know, like, okay, that's something that we changed by the time we did this film?
Gosh, I don't know that we changed. We changed a ton of things. We learned a mountain on Small Town Crime for sure, in a bunch of capacities.
Yeah, I feel like that was definitely our boot camp for shooting action, and our boot camp for working with a lot of. I mean, it was probably the first time we had such a massive ensemble on our hands. There was a lot of kind of breakthrough moments for us on that film. It was the first time we had a couple $1 million to work with, and actually, building teams in different departments and relying on them. Because a lot of times on independent films, you try to do as much as you can because you have to wear 25 hats. Right. Whereas the film starts getting bigger, you got to start relying on people, and that gets really scary for us, people like us anyway, because we're like, "Oh, we want it this specific way," and you just got to try to find those people that you really line up with that have a similar vision or understanding, and they're just really talented. And thank goodness for the last two films, we feel like we've really partnered up with some really talented people.
I also think there's this misperception that it's going to get easier the more money you have.
Yeah.
And that's not true at all. It's just the problems are just different.
Well, it's funny because you constantly think, okay, I got a little bit more money and I'm going to do this and this and this. And then you have to join 25 unions. And pretty soon that money that you thought you were going to use this, and this comes down to, you only get to do one thing with it. And okay, which one of those things do you want to pop up? Is it, you got to build something, or do you want to hire this actor, or do you want to do this? Like, it's
theoretically, I've heard some filmmakers, and I don't know if this is your experience. Theoretically, sometimes the money that you spend on the union sometimes gets you a skilled laborer that's able to save you some time on set. So it maybe makes your set run efficiently. And by the way, there's good union workers, there's bad union workers on every crew. So I mean, you never know. It's luck of the draw. But generally, when you get into a union shoot, sometimes it helps for a well-oiled machine, and I hope it did for you guys.
Look, there's no doubt that we've had been amazingly blessed with collaborators, both non-union on Small Town Crime and union on this one. I just think that the cost, the bare cost of the minimum of the movie rises, so it feels like you're almost robbing Peter to pay Paul in a lot of ways.
Yeah, if you were to make that same, I think Small Town was 1.9. If you were to make that same 1.9, it'd be a $5 million movie, and you'd get the same exact movie except you spent $5 million.
Yeah, right.
So it's just interesting how everything kind of goes clunk, clunk. And I mean, it's designed that way. You want people to make more money as you have more.
Get healthcare, things like that's nice.
Totally makes sense, but it's just interesting how that happens. There's no complaint here, but that's what happens.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Well, so tell me when the concept first came around for Fatman.
Man, so I mean, like I said, Ian and I have been kind of simmering and cooking and evolving this idea for about 14 years. We first came up with the script, maybe even longer than that, a couple of years before that, but it actually got into a coherent screenplay form about 14 years ago.
One that we would go out and pitch 14 years ago, you know.
And I think for us,
you went out and pitched it?
Oh yeah.
Well, we would send it to people as an example of our writing, and then they'd say, "Bring these insane people in. We want to talk to them." And then we'd come in and talk to them, and we would pitch them that, you know, we needed to direct it, and we were pumped about it. And yeah, I think a lot of those first meetings were more to just see who the maniacs were that wrote it, and get introduced to us. But yeah, then when the conversation started getting more serious about us making it, the questions were about tone, as I was talking about before, and like, okay, well, what is this like? I know you've done this, you know, Lost on Purpose, this dairy movie, but that doesn't really show me what this is going to be like.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think there was just room in the genre, of the Christmas genre, right? Like we'd all seen the more family fare of Tim Allen, which is great. But then we'd also seen the sociopath that came down your chimney and chopped you up. And then there's great ones like Rare Exports. And so we were like, oh, there's room in this genre for like a gritty, you know, like thriller-esque fantasy Santa movie.
And we're big
fans. Where did you want to land? Because, you know, there's obviously in horror, there's like Black Christmas, you know, obviously there's Bad Santa, which is classic and really shook things up. For anybody really looking out there, there's a French film that is just crazy. I think it's known in English mostly as Deadly Games or Dial Code Santa Claus.
Sounds yeah.
It's a French movie, and I think they got into like even a lawsuit against Home Alone. It came out in '89, and Home Alone came out a year later because it's about a kid who's defending himself at home from a deranged, basically homeless Santa who tries to break in and pretend to be real Santa and literally wants to kill the kid, like kill for real. But yeah, in French it's like I think it's 3615 code like Noel or something like that. Anyhow, search it out if you could find it. Even if you could watch a trailer, it's crazy. But so where did you guys want to land in this kind of burgeoning genre of adult Christmas films that have a hair fuzzy feeling but aren't fuzzy in themselves?
I can tell you something that
I think it's interesting because we were just talking about this the other day, like what our first two DVD purchases were.
Yeah, I think this will tell you a lot about where we were and where we're at as like, you know, what inspires us, I guess.
And so my first DVD purchase was Unbreakable.
And my first DVD purchase was Unforgiven.
Okay.
So I think you kind of like mash those up and add a little bit more dark comedy, a little zest to dark comedy, and you're kind of landing where we wanted to land on this one.
Yeah, I think we wanted to really ground the approach and make him more of a badass. And we wanted to slide him into, because there's room, right? He's got these powers. He's kind of a mystery. He's hiding out amongst the people. We really wanted to get in and see what that would look like if we kind of broke him down and flattened him out and you had a real person in front of you. You know, like if I've seen online people say, it's like the Logan of Santa movies. And I mean, that's a fucking ridiculous, amazing comp. But I mean, that was kind of our approach. Like what would really happen if you had this Santa? Like, where would he live? How would he use his powers? How would he be? Like, that's how we were approaching it.
We were really interested in like, okay, well, we don't want to see Santa like the silhouette go up through the moon, right? We don't want to see him tiptoeing through the house and like delivering.
There's things we didn't want to see because we were just like, that takes us away from like our grounded approach. And now you're like caught up in like, how does he get to 300 billion freaking houses in that amount of time?
Or even just into one. I mean, like,
right.
Yeah.
Like it's creepy if you think about the stalker guy who's sneaking in your food. Look, as a Jewish kid, like I only learned things about Christmas through the movies. So thank you for continuing to educate me here. When I was in fourth grade, I was telling one of my friends about this movie the other day. When I was in fourth grade, I'm going to give this to you. I don't ever really, in my screening series and podcasts, you've never heard me pitch a filmmaker with an idea, but I'm going to give you one in case you ever do a sequel. During the Cold War era, my friends and I were joking around. I think I was in the fourth grade, so it was definitely more Cold War era. And I came up with Commie Claus, the communist Santa Claus, and that each country would have their own version of Santa Claus. And Commie Claus, of course, had an AK-47, and there were patriots that would fight against Commie Claus in case he ever went over that Bering Strait, whatever it is, by Alaska that separates Alaska and Russia. And there was just a lot of action with Kami Claus and the U.S. Air Force, I remember. So in case if this yields a sequel, Kami Claus could be out there as a possibly.
At the very least, Jeff, I think this is an aside to what we've done. An accompanying piece.
Or it's, yeah, it's like the Drago versus Rocky.
Exactly.
That's right. If you ever do a sequel, maybe Kami Claus is an ally of this character, or maybe an enemy. Who's to say? All right. Well, so I want to give people a baseline for your creative habit. Obviously, you're brothers. Do you guys write together, or do you break the story together and then go off and write alone? I can't remember the answer to that.
It's a little bit of all of it, honestly. So probably the biggest part of the process. So there's two biggest part of the process. Is probably the beginning of it and the ending of it, and the middle part is a jumble of us doing different things. So like we'll sit there and brainstorm, boom, 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 get the idea, toss it back and forth. Now we're not quite even sure who came up with the idea, but we have an idea that we both like. One of us goes and puts it down, and then from there we just literally rewrite each other until we're happy with it. And then at the very end of the day, I mean, we're out there directing it and editing it, but it's going over and over and over it until we both are happy with it. That's kind of how it works all the way through the process.
All right. And, I forgot to do this earlier just because during the pandemic, we have been putting these Zoomcasts into YouTube on the Backstory Magazine YouTube page. They still go into iTunes and Spotify, of course, but I think you guys are the first two people that have been in the same room together that I've interviewed this entire pandemic. So just for our YouTube listeners who are seeing you, but also for our podcast listeners who are hearing you, just give us a voice check. Say, who is Ian and who is Eshom? So everybody knows.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because people have trouble delineating our voices. We've sort of, our speaking patterns have sort of synced up over the years. But this is Eshom Nelms.
Okay.
This is Ian Nelms.
All right, so now everybody knows. Because see, in Zoom, everybody has their own little titles and they can see them perfectly. So, we've talked about this before, but outlining, how important is that to your process? And when you were doing this all these years ago, did you outline Fatman?
I think the first thing we did was we wrote it as a short story. It kind of goes off and on with outlining. If we're like super inspired, we'll write for a while, and then we might get sort of bogged down in the writing, and then we'll back up and start sort of outlining it again, and then we'll write like fire, and then we'll kind of back up and outline it again, and then of course there's all the rewriting processes of but I'd say we kind of go in and out of outlining, and of course when we're doing like a gig, like you've got to present a plan. You've got to present a plan that's a little more outlined than you would if you were just cutting loose in your living room.
But I think when we tend to do specs, it's a little more of a journey of discovery until we get
which is fun, which is funner. It's probably funner to write like that, but you get hired to do a job, and you gotta present something because they gotta pay you, and they're like, I'm not paying you for your sitting around
for your journey. We need to see where this is going.
Well, why a short story on this? Like, did you ever have plans to maybe submit it somewhere? I always find it interesting, and I think it's a great exercise when writers do that. So it's just always interesting to hear.
That's definitely something we don't do. We don't do it that often, but
I don't think we've actually ever done it since.
Yeah. Well, we wrote on this one, we had the idea, we thought it was cool, and we both went off and wrote a separate short story. His was the one we ended up going with, but mine was more of a prequel when we finished it. And it was just
much more expensive.
When we looked at them, we were like, okay, this one is batshit crazy and a period piece. That's probably not gonna be easy to get going. And this one's batshit crazy and contemporary. So let's do the contemporary one, and then we can do a prequel, later.
And I remember there was a guy that we were all working at ArcLight Hollywood at the time. So there was a guy there that was like,
you guys were working there as ushers, right?
I was working there as a concessionist.
I was actually working at Tony Roma's, a place for ribs.
Yeah, but I remember there was a friend of ours there, Jeremy Catalino, and I pitched Jeremy the ideas, and he was like, and we had a bunch of stuff we were going to write. Amongst them were Fatman. I remember he turned to us, he goes, write that. That's what you need to write. So
that's awesome. When you sit down to write, how long do you guys like to write for? Do you give yourself a set schedule or a page count to hit each day?
We're a little loose. It's more like, the good thing is that we're pretty diligent. Like we're workaholics, so we're constantly at it. And I will say that it's more about just getting something down that you can pass to the other person, whether it's a page or even a freaking sentence. Honestly, at times,
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know. When we and I aren't together and I'm left to my own, I try to hit about 3 hours. that's, but that's like real, like actual focus on the work, not like drifting over here or drifting over there. So 3 hours could take all day.
All right. I mean, that's great. There's no one way to do it. That's why it's always so fascinating to hear from everybody. And what do you guys do if you get writer's block, if you get it?
Just sit down.
Yeah.
We'll call each other up and go, all right, let's brainstorm. And, it might start with about 10 minutes of, I don't know what to do. And then honestly, like, we'll just start throwing out little nuggets like, okay, well, here's a terrible idea, but if it's like that, and then Ian will throw it back to me and goes, oh, well, we did this to it. Then it'll be
that
like,
actually might work, or that might actually be cool. And then pretty soon we have something we like.
I think anyone, like when we get like stuck on that, it's always call each other up. That's the absolute breakthrough moment. And I would encourage anybody who gets writer's block to find a wing person and spitball the idea.
Or a muse or something, someone to just talk to about it, because that helps a ton. And then they start throwing ideas at you that you didn't have, and they can jog something loose for you.
That's cool. I mean, just because we're talking about something that was such an early work for you guys, is there something that you did in your writing process now that maybe you would consider back then to be like a bad habit that you did when you were writing it that you don't continue anymore? Or would you say your process is overall the same?
It's probably it's interesting because now I have kids and a family, and I've probably I have to sort of pincer in the writing at certain points, and so when I actually sit down and write, I'm probably a lot more like feverishly writing, and like I've been churning on this for a certain amount of time when I actually get the chance to cut loose, so it kind of flows a lot more. And whereas before you would just kind of wake up, do whatever you're going to do till about 10 a.m., 11, noon, if you really had a late one. And then you sit down, you got your tea, you're looking at sites about 2 p.m. You're like, maybe I can crack open Final Cut and see or Final Draft, see what that looks like. And then you start reading over it. Pretty soon you start getting buzzed, after about an hour, about 3 o'clock, you're like, well, shit, I'm ready to write something. And then,
But then you're like, you know what? Though I should really watch a movie before I start.
I should probably watch a movie. Yeah, about an hour later, you're like, I got to get the creative juices going. Let's watch Unforgiven or something. Then you like watch a movie, and then you're.
By 10:30, I'll start writing.
And honestly, we would really hit our stride at probably about 10:30, 11, when everybody had shut down. There's no phone calls coming in. There's no emails. All the news stories have kind of broke for the day, and like everything's gone. And from like 10 to 2 or 3 a.m., you would really get something done. But
Ian's schedule's changed a little bit more.
It's changed,
and that's forced my schedule to be a little bit more practical.
So writing with kids, I've talked to a lot of people about it, and I have kids too. So I mean, trust me, I get it. Like it really is just a matter of take the free moments when you have a chance and let it percolate in your mind during the day as you're running around.
Yeah.
What I will say is, I'll go over to Ian's house. I don't even know how he writes anything in that environment. It's like I'm over here, like if there's like the faucet dripping in the kitchen, I'm like, I can't write. I got to go fix that. I go over to Ian's house, and it's like a freaking bomb went off. You got kids
sprinting in the background,
like screaming and playing, and having a good time, and like
screaming, going down the stairs.
They're like Alexa, play this, Alexa, play that, and I'm like, it's like cacophony. And I'm like, I don't know how you concentrate.
You get very good at focusing and just letting everything else fall away. And you said, Steph, I mean, you think about it for so long, and you're like ready to cut loose when you sit down. It's great.
Yeah, I feel that energy. My kids are, they're 11 and 13, so I'm kind of past the running around hovering that you have to do with the little ones. But don't worry, I just totally during the pandemic we got a pandemic puppy recently, like in a few weeks. Yeah, I'm sleeping about 4 hours tops a night. Wow. Like struggling to get my magazine deadlines and podcast deadlines done. Wow. It is crazy. It is like that whole thing of like you're waiting all day for that moment where the dog is asleep, so now you could like do something, and I'm like, yes, please.
I mean, you guys are probably you're the world's best teacher's assistant as well now, right? I mean, that's kind of how it works, right? Yeah. I got 2 kids on iPads, and every second they're like, Dad, she went too fast. I can't see I don't know what she's saying now. Yeah. Can you read this for me? They're 5 and 7. So it's 5-year-old's like, can you read this for me? Dad, I don't understand this. Or the 7-year-old's like, hey, come over here and this math problem we're doing, like she went too fast. And now I can't recall how.
Don't worry. I got out of math real quick because they teach math differently now. And I was always terrible at math and needed a tutor. So they know not to even come in my general direction with a math question.
They're like, Dad, never mind.
I'm just horrible. And I'm just like, figure it out for your own or just get a tutor like I did. Cause like math is not my thing. Well, so, this would go also towards basically your pre-production, right? Because like that's another creative habit that we look at. And obviously your shot compositions, especially for the end sequence, and we'll talk about it in the spoilers section, were really great. You know, you had overheads, you were doing a lot to set up the geography of your location, which is really important for action. And what kind of schedule did you have for pre-production on Fatman, and how important were things like storyboarding and shot lists?
So I think it was the Wild West on our pre-production, sadly, because we landed in between so many holidays.
So we got up there in November, and
where was there?
In Canada,
Ottawa. We were in Ottawa, Canada.
And so we got up there in November, scouted. I mean, that was an adventure in itself. I mean, just finding the homestead, Chris's homestead.
We probably visited like 100 some odd homesteads, ranches.
We were just looking on Google Maps as we were driving around with the scout, and we're like, well, that looks kind of like a farm. Let's just go over there, because we were looking for a very specific layout, right? Like you had written, like, oh, you've got the barn and the actual. We got like 3 other satellite structures, so it was very specific.
And then there had to be a certain amount of space in between those structures of like open land before you hit sort of a bank of trees that could disguise like the entryway and him coming in. And yeah, so we had something very specific we were looking for. And
then we ended up finding it.
Did you really wind up finding it on Google Maps? Is that really?
Oh, I promise you, this is wild. So we're looking at Google Maps after 4 days of scouting and probably 100 houses, and we find this place that's in the middle of what looks like a neighborhood. And we're like, okay, that's not going to work. There's going to be like trampolines and sheds and people. Like, this is in the middle of a neighborhood. But we're like, and we had written in it the homestead in the script, Chris's homestead, and the road that it's on is called Homestead Road. And we're like, this is ridiculous. Like, we got to go check it out. It looks like it's in the middle of a neighborhood, but there could kind of be like this thing. Long story short, we drive past all the trampolines and wood sheds and houses. We make a left. We go down a perfect lane of trees, which opens up into this miraculous farm from like 1820. It just stressed, beautiful, aged, wood structures. And it's all right there. You know, if you panned 1 inch to the left, you saw a house and a radio tower. You pan 1 inch to the right. Like, we had to be very creative in our angles, but we could shoot the whole thing there. And
it really did feel like the sort of heavens opened up, the sun was shining down, and we found the place. It was nuts.
That's awesome.
But then our schedule, and then as far as the other locations, we found an old chocolate factory to shoot the descent, the factory.
I was going to ask about that, because that was really cool, the way that the barn goes down into the factory. And I was curious if it was really just like an old loading dock of a factory, and you did like a little bit of a barn set on the top, so when you're looking up, you could see some of the rafters and stuff like that. If I'm not mistaken, is that the trick that you did?
Sort of. So we had a factory. There was an old Hershey's factory that we rented, and then we did some build outs in there, and they built this ramp that came down in that factory. We put a green screen up behind it, and then in the barn, the Kwanzaa hut looking thing. So that's what we were really after.
Which is literally it was actually just a hay barn. So it was just a half circle hay barn made out of pipe. And so we built the facade over it.
Yeah.
But then the real interesting thing was like, oh, we'll just dig a ramp here and build this. Well, you can only dig, there's like, rules. You can't just dig a big hole in the ground. So you can only dig like 4 foot hole.
So Chris August, our production designer, was like, I can only dig 4 feet down. So we're like, how's that going to work? What does he have to crawl into the?
Like, that's not going to work.
So he builds 4 feet up and digs 4 feet down, and then built something that looked like a cave, which was, we didn't think it was going to work, just because the way you try to wrap your mind around how that's going to look.
It was seamless.
Yeah,
but then you get the right angles and the right perspective.
It works great. Well, so tell us about having this strange dream come true. Put us in the sale of Fatman and having it, become a reality. I mean, like, it was after Small Town Crime, and so based on the success of that, is that kind of what led to it?
Absolutely. I think the biggest surprise to us is that we got to make it so soon.
We thought we were a couple away, because one, we thought the budget was going to be too high to do, because there's a lot of crazy stuff we wanted to do. And even though we didn't get to do all of the crazy stuff we wanted to do, we got to do quite a bit, and we were able to make it work. But it really became a reality. Like I said, with Small Town Crime, we were able to show that tone. And then once Mel came on, it became a real reality. So it was like, okay.
How did you get it to him? I mean, was he always your choice? Who else were you thinking about?
So we wrote this, 14 years ago. So our choices were very different then.
Yeah.
I think we had originally envisioned like Nicholson doing it.
Yeah. That would have been our quintessential.
That was like it was like Nicholson is Chris and Johnny Depp is the hitman.
Okay.
That was kind of the prototype 14 years ago. And then, as everybody ages gracefully, like our obviously a change because Jack's not really doing too much these days, but we were just like, we saw Mel at a 2016 screening of Hacksaw Ridge, and he had that beard. He was in the middle of the award circuit. He was like very passionately talking about his film, meeting his beard, and we were like, "Holy shit!" Like you could feel the weight on him. You could feel it because he was right in the middle of that award circuit, and he was just like
a little worn
down, and but he's still very passionate. You could see it in the eyes. But that's the guy. That's the look, and that's the feel. You could just get it right out of him. And then it was like, how do we get it to him? So.
3 years later,
3 years later, we had the movie and we had a moment and we said, "Hey, can we submit this to Gibson?" And they're like, "Great, send it to him." And we're like, "Okay, I guess that's
through your agents and managers."
Yeah.
And, so, the producers that were helping us get the project made.
Yeah. So it was like, okay, you send it out, and then you don't know if you're ever going to even hear back. So, which is usually how it goes. It's like, okay, a month went by. I guess he's not going to read it, or whatever. But 2 or 3 weeks later. We're doing a lot of meetings with financiers and whatnot. And it's like, we're getting a ton of emails in that are like, "Hey, I like the script.
Let's talk about it.
Let's talk about it." So I got this email that was like, "Hey, I read the script. I think it's really funny. I'd love to sit down with you guys for a chin wag." And we're like, okay. And first off, never seen, what's a chin wag? I've never seen that in an email before.
And there was no conspicuous email, right? It wasn't giving it away off the top.
Yeah, it wasn't like, Braveheart 25 or whatever. It was like a weird pseudonym. So we were like, okay, great, awesome, looking forward to sitting down with you. Who am I speaking with? Looking forward to it. And then he wrote back, "Oh, sorry, I forget to put down a sign off sometime. This is Mel." And then we were like, holy shit. Like, it was that moment.
We may have hugged.
I think we hugged.
That's amazing. That's crazy.
And then we were super excited. We sat down with him for what was supposed to be like a 45-minute meeting, which turned into like 3.5 hours of us talking about, not only cinema in general, but all of his films. And
then Fatman, obviously.
About Fatman. And it really was this moment during the meeting where
Fatman's because, definitely the next progression forward from Apocalypto. So, it's there's a connection between the two.
Exactly. This is an easy bridge. But he had this amazing, we had this amazing moment with him where he said, that moment in the when I'm looking out over the L's and I'm telling this story on the balcony, we're like, yeah. And he's like, I feel like this character would be in such a state. He's like, it's the worst news he's ever had to tell him. I feel like he'd really be about ready to cry. And we're like, yeah, exactly. And he goes, that's what I think is going to make it so funny. And we're like, exactly. Like, that's exactly what we're after. So he got the layers and the grounding approach, that sort of Western approach that we were after.
Yeah, he's like an old cowboy, this guy.
We're like, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's what we come from.
And his inclusion would solidify your funding pretty quickly, I would think, right?
Made it real.
Yeah, it made it real right away.
Yeah.
And then it was
so what was the budget?
We were under 10.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what was your schedule?
That was like after chasing all the
incentives and everything. Yeah, we didn't have 10 flat. We had less than that and had to get our way up there with incentives and whatnot.
Right.
What's interesting in Canada is that you go there and that you have a certain amount of money and you think, okay, well, it'll go this far, but when you get there, it's actually everything's a third more expensive.
Yeah, that was one of the kicks. You're like, oh man, I thought we were going to get a little bit more out of this, but then you have to sort of reset your expectations.
And then we shot for 33 days.
33.
Okay. I mean, Walter Goggins was a great addition as well. And, I thought that it was cool that Ruth, Santa's wife, was played by a person of color, of Marianne Jean-Baptiste. And so was that a concept in the script, or was that just something you guys realized during casting that you could do inclusion casting, which is always great to do?
We'd always set out to do that. We'd always set out to have the couple like that. And it's something we've done on our last couple of films since it really sort of clicked with us when we did Waffle Street.
And we paired Danny Glover with James Lafferty, not as a couple, right, but as a sort of mentor relationship.
And we really liked the dynamic there because it became, not only layered because it was an older guy laying into a younger guy and trying to make him, we called it like a Pinocchio story because it felt like this James Lafferty character was very broken, and Danny's character had to bring him and make him into a real boy again, real man. But we liked that dynamic. It added a bunch of layers to it by just making the dynamic different between, an older black man and then a younger white guy. Like it added a really cool, which is how it actually was, because it was based on a guy's memoir, and that's really what happened. So we really dug that. And then when we came into Small Town Crime Next, I remember Octavia saying, "Hey, what can I do in this?" She's like, "I'm going to EP this. Like, can I play a cop or something?" And then Esh and I took the night, and we are like, "Man, what would be pretty cool
just to make an interracial family,
to make this interracial family, and have Hawks come in and fuck up this family. Like, that'd be really cool, and kind of a little bit of a flip of what you usually see."
And then so we landed on Fatman. That was always in our mind's eye to do that. We always wanted an interracial couple.
And what we liked about it most is that it was something we hadn't seen before. It's a world we want to live in. We like to sort of upend people's expectations with little hits like that.
It was great. It was I mean, it was a great concept, and she played the role beautifully. She was
so amazing, man.
I mean, I felt she was just so tired of him. Like every scene, she's just acting like exasperated of like taking care of this broken man. I almost felt bad for her the whole movie.
He's drag-assing around, she's giving him a kick in the fanny.
Yeah. Looks like she has good cookies though. I was jonesing for some cookies during that. Well, so tell me this, how important is storyboarding and shot listing, to your process?
The storyboards are the shot list. So Esh is a professional storyboard artist. And I mean, he storyboards every frame of the movie, where there's two people sitting across from each other or whatever.
Every frame.
Doesn't matter.
How long does that take you, Eshom?
Forever. It's a nightmare.
It can be kind of brutal, because sometimes you don't get locations to the last minute, and then you can do as many boards as you can up until you start shooting. But then once you start shooting, now you're getting up between 3 and 4 hours, and these aren't Rembrandt, like they're
I know
they can be rough and they can still convey the message that you need. But we'll tend to get up 3 or 4 hours before we get to set and do that, so you're during production, you're sleeping like 4 hours a night.
Right.
You're running on excitement. You're not running on sleep.
Have you ever used any of those storyboarding programs? Because like I know a few filmmakers, they just can't draw to save their lives. But there's been a few of these programs in which you could get all the elements. Like I'm just making this up. Like kitchen set, gun on table. Like they don't have like textures that look amazing, but you could get a man character, like a little dummy doll that's holding a gun at a certain angle, and you could, camera up, camera down. And that's been kind of like really helpful for a few of my friends. Have you ever used software, or is it just you prefer to do it freehand because you have that skill?
Yeah, I think that's it, right? Like it's just quicker for me personally to do it freehand, but I honestly don't think the degree that you're able to render something matters at all. Like just make it blocks, stick figures, a circle for a head, a square for a torso. Like all you're looking to do is just convey shot compositions to your director of photography. I mean, if you look at some of like Martin Scorsese's boards for Taxi Driver.
Yeah, I was just going to say that.
Those are rough, but you understand, you look at the scene, you're like, yep, that's it. Like you don't need to think fancy. You don't need to look like comic books.
I'll say the difference between Esh doing storyboards for us and maybe pulling out of a computer is that it's like, he's so specific, because we go to a location, he literally takes a walk around it, and he's got a pretty, great memory when it comes to visuals and angles, and like, cause he'll board something and it's like at a certain angle, and because he's cutting out a bunch of stuff behind there that we can't see or don't want to see. And it's like, okay, I've checked it a ton of times. I'll look at the angle. I'm like, are you sure that's at the right angle? We're not going to be able to see that dirt field behind there. It's going to look like an actual road goes off into a freeway. And he's like, yeah, we'll be okay. Then we get there and Johnny lines it up, and man, it looks great. He's just got a really good eye for like where those angles are.
That's awesome. Well, so, okay. Podcast listeners, YouTube viewers, we are going to get into the spoiler section. So if you have not yet seen Fatman, press pause, go find it on VOD, watch it, come back, because now we're going to talk into the nitty-gritty of the story details of Fatman. So, one of the things that I always love to talk about is just left field ideas, like things that you had that you wish, if there was unlimited time and money, that you could have put in the film. Maybe it was an early idea you had that you realized you just had to cut on paper. So what were some of the other ideas that you played with that you just couldn't realize because of, the practical limits of making a movie?
I'll say the easiest one to jump on is is the factory. We're super excited about what we came up with for the budget that we had for it, but we had
it looked great, by the way, the factory.
Thank you. And the approach,
but it was what we had in our mind's eye.
Some really cool shit.
Was much more elaborate. And
it really just came down to not having enough money, anywhere near enough money to do what we were after, or time, honestly.
It's funny. It's funny that you focus on that though, because it's almost background. Like I could see probably you had visions of them making specific toys. I don't remember them actually doing anything with a toy in the entire movie. I got the sense that there was a production line, and everybody had a zone and a break room and a place to eat lunch and stuff like that. So factory read perfectly. I didn't need to see them making toys because like you kind of know what they do.
Well, we're off season, so you wouldn't see them making any toys since they're off.
Right.
Yeah. And then the other side is the only time you see the thing actually kind of churning is when they're making the parts for the jet.
I guess like some of the things that we had in our mind's eye were like the automotive robotic arms.
Yeah, so what you see in Tesla, and then we wanted to pair those with like old sewing looms that used to run up to the ceiling and run on pipes and spin, and these big belts would go cool. all the way up to the ceiling.
Yeah.
And so we like the idea of pairing that layered technology.
So it'd be like, throughout the decades and centuries, they had like the technology had sort of just compiled, and like we had
kept the best of the best,
Yeah, and like we love that scene in THX 38 where all the dudes have their arms and the people have their arms in the machine. Right. And so we just had we wanted like a bunch of different rooms where you would see different stuff like that.
And we had to condense it down to a walk down a hallway and then a switch into the room and try to make it feel like when he looks out the window that this thing could go on forever, or this thing could go on.
And it was clear that you were going for a little bit of a steampunk vision. They had those goggles going and stuff like that. So it's like that definitely translated as well. And I liked the idea of them retooling the factory for a military contract. I thought it was interesting that you came up with this premise that there's so many bad kids in the world that their production is off and it's like hurt them. Like that premise. Yeah. What you say? What?
So we were in a bad place.
Yes. Well, I mean, but that's actually a really good premise for that genre, in which that's why they're on hard times, because there aren't enough good kids in the world that deserve toys. I thought that was like actually a cool concept.
It was just, that was just a device to get the engine churning that we needed to have that create the real. Because he and I did a whole Word doc of like rules for Christmas. Like, oh, here are the rules for Fatman. Like, there was a bunch of things.
Tell us a few.
Yeah, there was a bunch of things that no one's ever addressed, and they aren't specifically mentioned. Like some of them aren't specifically mentioned in the film, but like, when do kids stop getting toys? That's never been talked about ever. Like, adults don't get toys, right? So we had to come up with a cutoff. And so we were like, okay, as soon as you reach teenage years, you're done.
So 12 was our cutoff. So Billy's right at the end of it. And of course, that's right when he's hitting that sort of pubescent rage, turning into a little hellion. But that was one of them. Another one that was fun to think about was the one where Chris, he knows when you're sleeping, he knows when you're awake, he knows if you've been naughty or nice. And so that's an interesting power, because if he was going to have all of that functioning at the same time, obviously he'd be a schizophrenic. You'd have a bazillion people in your head at all times. So that doesn't quite work. But what would work is if he could look at your name or look at your face and instantly have a download of who you are and what your history is. So it's a little more concentrated. It's omniscient, but it's concentrated so that a human being could handle it mentally. Otherwise, your brain would explode, I think. So, yeah.
Yeah, and you gave him some kind of superhuman strength that we'll get into a little more later as well, and I thought that was good. And did you ever have rules for the elves? Like they had the ears going, they had the funny shoes. Was there anything superhuman about them that you ever were going to have them do? Because overall, they're pretty much just allies in this movie. They don't really do anything with superpowers or anything like that.
Sure.
I mean, that they were very deft of movement.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's that one scene where the elf kind of does the bomb real fast. So
right. Undoes the bomb, takes it apart, which was cool.
And I don't believe that's actually sped up at all. Well, that was maybe a touch, but
it's a little bit.
So that was the amazing thing, is we thought we shot all these plates of that scene because we were like, hey, Dylan, can you get this moving as fast as possible? And he's like, let me see what I can do.
He took it back to his trailer and
fought around it for like an hour. And then he came back and he's actually pretty slick. He was like, and we're like, wow, okay.
I mean, and it read because they're all factory workers and they're playing with things and toying with things. So it actually made sense that he would just instantly take it apart. Like I thought that was cool. But so okay, nothing else supernatural with the elves, right?
I know that
Other than they live an immensely long time, and I feel like there would be some overlap with Chris's sort of vibe, right? They've got probably a little bit better motor skills, and probably a little stronger. They live a lot longer. They would heal to some degree.
I mean, we did come up with like, what their eating habits are and what their sleeping habits are, which we thought was funny because, Christmas has a connotation of being linked to a bunch of sweets and eating sweets. And, maybe that's why it's kind of come down out of these sugaraholic elves. And
luckily none of them are diabetics. So like, I was worried for them when I saw their lunch menu.
But I would imagine for them, their genetic makeup doesn't allow that.
Yeah.
It must. The other side was, we really wanted to create those elves in a way that, if they put on a hat and went down to the beach, you might not, if they went outdoors and you saw one and they had the right hat on covering the ears, that you just be like, oh, that's a 5'2", 5'3" person and not a big deal. Like there's just the shade of their face is a little bit green.
Yeah.
So we were trying to pull back, that sort of green apple face that you've seen on a bunch of
Shrek or something like that.
Yeah, like we wanted to pull that back into a realm of like, okay, how would this actually exist? And if these folks like went down to the grocery store, like, could they pass? That's what we were asking.
Did you have to do any forced perspective with them? I felt like there was maybe a hint of it once or twice, or did you not?
Just sort of putting some apple boxes and stuff under people to make them slightly taller.
The other thing we did was we cast the soldiers over 6 feet, and we didn't cast an elf over 5'5".
Got it. Okay.
And then you would get some people of shorter stature, and so we would load them in the front, and then put the juxtaposed against the taller soldiers, and then look, you can't get under 5 people all the time, under 5 people, so we would put those people in the back, and so it would sort of ramp up. So in a way, yes, it is a forced perspective, but
okay.
And that was the goal, is that we wanted them to be realistically short. We didn't want them. I mean, it's in Christmas Chronicles, they're like, I don't know, 2 apples high or something, which is, obviously you'd recognize that if they went out in public. So we wanted to try to like really ground it. If you saw one, you wouldn't quite think they were elves.
Yeah, and I thought it was a good story point for what you were going for, to have the military come in for this contract, so that there was, people that were armed that were there, for the foil, for the assassin to mess with. But it's interesting though, because I could see a version of this where you didn't do that and the elves were armed. Did you ever consider something like that? Was that ever on your drawing board?
We kicked the idea around, but ultimately the nature of elves for us is not that they're going to be wielding guns and shooting things. I mean, I think for them, like this is a huge crisis that they have to go and make these control panels for these fighter jets. So like, there's no way the moral conscience is going to allow them to make gun or to tote a gun, more or less, even make a gun.
All right. Well, so how about this? This is kind of the bones of the movie that I thought was, I'm just like looking at this, I want to make sure I got this right. So, tone is a difficult thing to, maneuver in movies. And here it was interesting because it is a comedy, but you have very serious elements to it, right? Of these people with their lost dreams and whatever, and they want revenge on Santa for, not getting toys and the feeling of neglect. And at the same time, you're trying to do a little bit of the Hollywood, the Christmas cheer that folks are used to in these movies. And you're also doing a hardcore action movie where there's people being, shot in the head. And basically the assassin is going around pretty much killing anyone he comes into contact with, except for the little girl who he kidnaps and puts back as his first contract that was not for death. And I'm curious, what were the challenges there? Because that's always tough to deal with. And in that same question, just to also load it for what I'm really going for, is I could see a version of this movie that would also be PG-13 just as easily as I could see one that's R. And so I'm just curious if that was ever a debate for you guys as well. Because Christmas movies have such a shelf life that, you show some of the deaths off screen, you show some of the deaths on screen. So I was just curious how that played into your conversation.
Well, I think as far as the R conversation, we always intended this to be R. That was like number one from the start gate. Anyone that came in to talk to us about the movie, they'd be like, what's the rating? Like, it's an R, for sure. And then as far as the degree of violence and where that gets, for us, we wanted to ramp into it. And then to kind of surprise you at the end that it actually goes that far. So, but when you reflect upon it, it seems only natural that that's where it had to go.
Right.
And so for us, that was the sort of trajectory that we wanted to do. And so we seeded some of that with, you see a little splash of gore with Chris's wound off the top. So you're like, okay, like this movie.
They're not afraid
to
show blood. They're not afraid to show a little blood and guts here. Okay, this could be interesting.
But
Let's see how far they take this.
Yeah, but we didn't want to fatigue the audience with showing really gory headshots and like all this crazy stuff with Skinny Man. And so we wanted to save that sort of visceral reaction for later.
Well, because we want you to have that visceral, emotional, all of it kind of spinning at the same time. And we didn't want to desensitize you by the time you get to that last shootout. But we wanted to preclude it enough to where it made sense that it was in the film. And I think our philosophy on how much we want to show and why is mainly because we feel like action sequences need to have consequences to some extent. And we don't want you to watch that action sequence and have a really jolly good time while you're watching it, because I think that gives the wrong message as far as action sequences and what it would actually be like to be in an action sequence like that. And we want you to be there. We want you to be in there with them and feel just as horrified as they are at times about what's happening and how it's going down. Otherwise, I think you're kind of glorifying the violence, which for us, making it more gory, making it more realistic, I think gives you a more realistic sense of like, oh, jam, like that went someplace I wasn't expecting. That's not something I want to experience.
Obviously, you had done some gunplay in Small Town Crime. What did you learn about working with guns in this movie? Because obviously there's a safety issue. You want everybody safe, and I'm hoping that there were no accidents or anything that went wrong. But what did you learn about just coordinating and shooting it, and how long it takes to shoot and reset? Because you really basically had two people. There's a few scenes where there's a few soldiers, but it was generally a one-on-one situation. I'm just curious what you learned and you could impart to other filmmakers about shooting shootouts.
Well, I think the first thing we learned is it would take two idiots from California to think a gun battle in the snow is a good idea. That was a really challenging thing to do. And especially like, even if you just look at it from a continuity standpoint, right? So you have to shoot every wide out first, because as you start going in for coverage, your entire production crew.
There's no going back because it's trampled on. So, right. And the last thing you want is a giant big snow to reset everything, because you have to sort of have your line in. And since it's snow and it's knee deep, it's literally knee deep, you get to see all those tracks and trails in. So it was the continuity of it was interesting.
And I remember we had to get the course set up, the field, everything set up, because there was this big snow coming. So we're racing to get it going. And I mean, honestly, like you had to even put all the squibs in ahead of time. Like you had to squib the car, because then it had the snow on top of the car, and we didn't have a huge budget to go splash around with a bunch of snow and make all that fake. So it had to be real, and we had to like back into it. And I think the other, I don't know, go ahead.
I think the biggest thing we like to do with action scenes that we learned on Small Town Crime is try to run them as in order as possible, and sort of make it so that the actors can, like, they understand every move. So it would be, even if you had to spend half a day going over the action sequence with them as to everything, that they can play it out perfectly every time. Because when you start kind of moving around and jumping to different angles, as long as they're able to just be like, okay, I'm just going to do my thing, boom, and they know where their stops are, and they'll do this, and then I go here and I do this, and I go here and I do this, and I move up to the tractor and I do this, and I crawl up. As long as they have all those beats down, for us, like it seems to flow pretty endlessly, and we can just jump around them and shoot them as they go through their motions. That is probably one of the best things we learned about shooting action, the way that we like to see action. I've seen a lot of other directors that just like to kind of punch in and cover, and then pull back out and punch in and cover, and then pull back out. And it just seems like that style of covering action seems a little frenetic for us. We like to be a little more over the shoulder and really get into geography. And it's just two different ways of doing something, but that's how we like to do it.
I also think that
sequentially makes sense. That is good. That gives everybody a sense of what you're doing.
We really enjoy putting the full load rounds in the guns. It just seems to give them. It's in photographing it. It has a nice bark of fire out of the barrel and all that good stuff.
Yeah. Is there a distance the camera has to be when you do something like that? Like
certainly. Yeah.
What is it? I mean, of course there is, but what is it?
I think it's 6 feet or something like that. And then of course, you're trying to get those close-ups of a gun firing. And, there was one point where you get thank goodness there's all kinds of safety precautions in place. So it's not like you'll never take a moment where it's like you've got the gun up against somebody's head or something.
Right.
You're never making those types of mistakes these days, which is great, knock on wood. But the mistakes that we did make were we had this plate in front of the camera,
plexiglass plate,
plexiglass plate, which was great. And it comes up and we are the distance away that it should be. And then we shoot the gun and boom, like the percussion out of the gun was so hard
the muzzle flash,
right, that and the fire, it created a giant hole in the plexiglass.
So it just burned it.
Right, but not a hole in it, I'm sorry, but it created a giant mark in it. Yeah. So that it was literally, he shoots, boom, and then the shot stays on the plexiglass. So you're just looking at it.
So we're panning and it's like mark, and like,
so that didn't work. So we had to back up again and you realize how dangerous those damn things are, because you are the proper distance away and it's still making those marks on the plexiglass. Like if that was somebody's body or head or part or something, like there's gonna be damage.
And then we had 4 days to shoot that sequence, the entire sequence.
Okay.
In negative 30-degree weather.
Wow. It was unbelievable.
And so Ian and I we're like dressed to summit Everest. Right. And like Mel's out there. And when we had originally conceived this idea, we wrote that Chris came out in pants and a bulletproof vest only.
Clutching the gun. So bare arms.
Well, it would have looked badass.
Because we wanted the scars to show up all over his arms, which we realized very quickly after living there for a couple months that we were not going to be able to shoot that sequence with Mel bare armed and bare chested. And we were like, that was the stupidest idea ever. And so we obviously put him in his jacket and whatnot, but we were, we had to basically back that idea up because it was freaking impossible.
But I'll say one thing about Mel is, man, he is a soldier. He was out there. He would not leave the set in that sort of frigid temperatures. He was sitting out there with his green tea, talking to the crew, regaling anybody that would come in and, want to chit chat with him. And
he's literally in fingerless gloves because he has to work a gun. And if your fingers are exposed, if there's skin exposed for any longer than 8 minutes, I think is what they told us, 8 minutes, because your hands were numb within 60 seconds of taking them out of your gloves. Within 8 minutes, you have irreversible damage.
Like some frostbite damage.
Yeah. Wow. So Mel was literally in between takes, hot pockets and hand things and all this jazz in his jacket. He would stuff them in there. But he was out there in his costume and we were out there in serious, mountain scaling gear. And he was out there for 14 to 16 hours with us every day, refused to go to the warming tent. And he was literally like, I'm out here if you're out here. Like, I'm not going in. So that was really, cool. that was really galvanizing for everybody on the set.
And I like the coordination of that sequence behind the big wood pile. I thought that your top views really made it. Was that a crane that you got for one day, or was it a drone? Would you get your top shots with?
That was like a big arm that we just put up.
Like a jib arm?
Yeah, I don't think we didn't have the crane.
It was not a proper jib.
We did not have the jib arm that we wanted. So it was some C-stands going up and it kind of got it done.
We created something, and it was a still shot. We weren't able to move it.
Yeah, we did have a big.
It works better as a still, though. I mean,
it did.
Yeah, it was great. It was great. Ooh, hey, I'm jumping in really quick to remind you to check out Backstory Magazine. You could read us over at backstory.net on a desktop, laptop, or via our iPad app. If you've never read us before, I hope you'll consider checking out our free issue. It tells you exactly who we are, what we do. We are one of the only magazines in the world that publishes screenplays in their entirety, accompanied by interviews with the screenwriters. We do it all the time, not just when there's an award show getting ready to happen. And look, it would mean the world to us to have your support. So I hope you check out the free issue. If you've subscribed in the past, but you'll let your subscription lapse, we're doing a lot of cool stuff during the pandemic. We're putting in screenplays that I've always wanted to put into that magazine because I've really reached out to a nice bunch of writers who's helping us out. So that's kind of cool, and I hope you'll check that out. If you want to subscribe during the pandemic and you want a discount code, how about SAVE5? That's SAVE and the number 5. You could use that at backstory.net, and your credentials will work on the iPad, but the coupon code only works at backstory.net. That'll save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. The only complicated thing going on, other than, of course, us publishing our long-delayed pandemic issue, issue 42, which is coming out very soon, so please subscribe now. You'll get that instantly when we publish it, is our archive got zapped. I'm trying to spread this information as well. Our archive got zapped of our old issues when we were forced to change software. So we now have to restore it by redoing every single article in every single previous issue. So we are coordinating doing that, of catching up with our old issues into the archive, along with publishing new content. New content gets the first run of things. So that's the most important, is for new content to go forward. But we just posted issue 30 this week. We're working on issue 29. So if our new issue is issue 42, we're back about 2 years right now. So we're going to keep going back all the way as far as we can. So be patient with that, and thanks for your patience. But there's a lot of great stuff in backstory, and especially because you are going to continue to have access to our archive, I hope you consider becoming a subscriber. And also, I hope you consider watching Fatman, because it was made by the Nelms brothers, and they were previous podcast listeners as well. So it's a great way to support independent film. And speaking of which, let's jump right back into our conversation with co-writers, co-directors, Ian and Eshom Nelms, to discuss Fatman. Rewriting on set. How often did you guys find yourselves needing to rewrite, or was there just no time?
There was actually
a couple things.
We actually had to rewrite a couple things. Like after Walton came in and started doing his character, we realized that the initial intro for his character didn't work because he was playing it. It's just the scenario we had sort of written in there didn't work for the character because he was too alpha. He was too assertive.
Sleek,
he just would have never done what we had written in there initially. He kind of turned into something a little bit different. So we just had to change his occupation basically, but it was basically the same type of idea in the scene. He used to work in a toy store, and it didn't work. It just didn't make any sense.
Got it. So that's something you cut out. Okay.
Yeah. And we just made him more of a specific collector, which actually fueled his backstory and stuff more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, right. Because he's collecting toys from people that actually got stuff from Santa, since he didn't. So,
Right.
so you're saying that was a rewrite during production?
Well, not that was in the script. Like that whole scene, he pulls over and gets this thing from the kid. He's like, Santa, give that to you. Like we
and
had
he buys the bat in the beginning.
That was not in there. We rewrote that halfway through the production. We rewrote that, and he gets the bat first, which we thought would be cool to link to the stuff later, because he was working in a toy store, but it wasn't reinforcing his backstory that well. And it was just more of like fun. Like there was a couple of fun gags in there, but he's equally as fun. And
was he an assassin at a toy store?
Yes, he was.
Okay, so like Toy Store was his cover.
Correct.
Yes,
that was his tax shelter.
And he obviously didn't give a fuck about that job. But what he was looking for were toys, valuable toys, and people with toys, or toys.
That's a good rewrite, and that also saves you a location. So I could see there being a lot of benefits to that.
You're not wrong there. Yeah. There was a bunch of benefits to it, and honestly, like a much better.
It took nothing away.
And I remember when we were location scouting, and this is why you kind of like you can pre-plan and storyboard and make all these plans, but when you get there, the environment speaks to you. Like what's unraveling in front of you. Like pay attention. Like Ian and I were scouting that location, and they just randomly showed us that room with the 3 windows. Like,
we have this empty room if you need an office or something. And we were like, oh, wow. But they were these really cool windows up top.
Yeah, like you can put your makeup or whatever in here. And we're like, oh, that would be pretty cool. But just like, shafts of light coming through those windows. With Walton, like, instantly saw it like silhouetted against it. We're like, oh, that would be badass. How do we use that? I'm like, okay, well, let's keep going on. And then, about halfway through the production, we're like, oh, let's get that room and do this scene in there.
Here's what we would do. We realized, okay, here's what we would do with it, and here's how we could build the scene around that. So, I mean, we had to rewrite it on the fly, but we were cooking with the idea the whole time, because you just need to establish a couple of things off the bat. It's like that he's collecting these toys, that he's his own man. And that was the other thing the toy store didn't work, is that he was like working for somebody else. And even though he didn't give a shit about the job and was giving the guy shit, we were just like his manager shit, or the owner. We were just like, there's no way this guy would put himself in a subservient position like the way that Walton's doing it. You can't ever see him working for somebody else in a way, except for like a hired hit, because
no, that's an interesting rewrite. I mean, that's a really good rewrite. Was there anything else that
there was one thing that Walt came to us with? He goes, I really want to eat lunch in a Chinese restaurant.
That was funny. He literally came up with that and said, I want to do a scene in a Chinese restaurant. We're like, okay. So he's
random.
Like, it was so random, but we're like, oh, that
could be interesting, because we had the jiu-jitsu scene. We had a couple of other things. So then we came up with the idea to cut it all together and make it this like him getting back to the basics. Of
we really enjoyed. There's a lot to A Christmas Story.
When he's eating that duck, it's got the head on it still. But
there's like little
that, but that makes
little things like that.
I mean, I liked. I thought it. It was a good way to just break where you were. So as a location, the Chinese restaurant was great. The jiu-jitsu was very, very funny. I thought that was hilarious that he gets too into it with his sparring partner that he just goes crazy. He's like, I broke his arm. I think I broke his arm. He's like really ecstatic about it and just couldn't care less. Tell us about what you do on set. How important is rehearsal? Do you guys have time for rehearsal on a movie with 33 days and actors like this? Or are you really just kind of doing blocking and stuff like that, on the set as you're shooting?
Yeah. I mean, in this one, we didn't have a ton of rehearsal time. We had several conversations with the actors beforehand, getting in the vibe. But look, these folks are consummate professionals. Like when they show up and they've had a couple conversations with you, like they understand, they've done the homework, they're ready to go. When they land, they're ready to rock. And so Ian and I, when we get there, and everyone's different as far as blocking too, right? So you have it boarded out, and you kind of say, oh, well, we're thinking this to this to this, and then that sort of evolves through. The actor.
Like, well, I was thinking this and this, and then it becomes a collaboration of, okay, how do we get to that point that we need to end the scene at sometimes, blocking wise. So it's like, okay, how about I come over here and I do this and I grab this and I walk over here and I do that, and you're quick, you're great. And then we run it a couple times, and then, they go work on their sort of mental preparation as we light it.
That makes sense. How many cameras were you guys shooting with?
2.
Well, we shot 2 throughout the whole shoot. And then when we got to the action sequence at the end, we put 3 in play.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense because that would get you more coverage, which you desperately needed. So how are the cameras reacting in that environment? Like what did you learn about using digital cameras in temperatures like that?
They surprisingly worked well.
Yeah, we used Alexa, and it worked phenomenal.
It was impressive.
They were bulletproof. They honestly didn't have a single problem.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And then literally we're talking about negative 30 degrees, snow, sleet. I couldn't believe the elements that we were throwing at these machines, and they were just still hard charging.
We never had to replace a body or anything. They were champs.
You talked about this before in our last podcast, but how do you guys divvy up your directing duties when you're on set? Because it's something that people are always, confounded by. You don't see a lot of co-directors, and even the DGA gives a lot of hassle to people that take co-director credit often. So what were the challenges for you guys as co-directors? And do you divvy up like, okay, I'm the one that deals with the actors, I'm the one that deals more with the camera, or do you guys just switch up everything?
Switch up everything. I mean, really for us, Ian and I's goal is that one of us could go get, fall off a cliff, and the other one could carry on as if that person didn't disappear. We are becoming like a hive mind over the years. We've become more and more codependent on one another. But we I don't know. There is no delineation like, oh, hey, you're going to go talk to an actor.
No, I think it's honestly just whatever, because we both know the script so well because we both put it together, and then we both know the storyboard so well because he's boarded from the script, and then we talk about it, and I say, oh yeah, well, what about this shot or whatever? But pretty much we both know the boards really well. And then the DP knows the boards really well, and then so when we show up and we start talking to actors, it's literally what our idea was to shoot it, and it's like, okay, camera's gonna be over here, and then it's just nuance of like, okay, well, what if I did this? Or what if I did that? And then after that, in between takes, it's like, hey, well, I'm drinking tea right now. You want to go tell him, or I can go tell him, or what? It's like, whatever. It's like, hey, I'm going to go grab this. You tell him, and I'll go grab this. Like, we're pretty egoless about it. There's no like, oh, I'm the only one that should be talking to the actors. We're just like, whatever. You go tell him, or I'll go tell him. Yeah.
And it's really great to have an instant sounding board as well. So like we'll sit there, we'll watch a take, and I'm like, oh, that's amazing. And Ian will be like, I'd really like that too. And I'm like, good.
I'd say once in a while there's like a discrepancy, and it's like, we both like walk up, and then one of us will start talking and delivering an idea or a pitch of like, hey, what if you did a little bit, or hey, I loved how you did this or whatever. And the other one just usually just listens. And then if anybody has something to say, they just speak up, and then we have a quick conversation round table in 20 seconds, and then we're out.
Look, I think it's natural for some actors to be concerned, like, okay, how is this going to work? And we've been tested, I
remember Hawks told us at a Q&A later, he told the story where he was like, I went up to Eshom when he was alone, and I said, hey, what do you think about this? He's like, and he gave me an answer. I was like, okay. He's like, and then I wandered off, and I watched Ian until he broke away, and then I went to Ian, and I asked him the same exact question. He gave me the exact same answer. I was like, okay, I think we're gonna be all right.
Hive mind for the win. Speaking of the win, here Santa is going to prevail. But what were some of the things you considered with his powers? Because he has a regenerative power. I like seeing that he's coming home from Christmas nursing a bullet wound where people were shooting at him. And, you know, even Wolverine and Deadpool both get stumped sometimes when they get a headshot. And ultimately he does recover from a headshot. And, you know, I guess it's just, you know, hope and the fun act of giving, but it seems like you know, he says when he took this job, which indicates that there's been Santas before him, and do Santas die out or retire? And tell us some of those rules, especially about how his superpowers work and a little of the backstory.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think Ian and I, you know, obviously with the regenerative stuff, like he's absolutely going to get injured. And I think it didn't come from originally thinking about battle wounds. It came more about like, oh, well, you know, everyday life, you're going to get hurt. You know, you're going to mangle an arm, like, you know, he would be covered in scars from that. And then we sort of extrapolated out to, oh, there'd been other instances where people had come for him possibly, and that's just, you know, some of the wear and tear on his body.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the like prequel idea we had of where he came from and how he became who he is and why he is where he is, I want to say, because it's absolutely in our heads for a prequel. I don't want to give too much of that away. And again, with Mrs. Claus's past as well, we had a lot built in there that we're excited to extrapolate on if we get the chance.
Okay, fair enough. I look forward to.
I don't want to give you too much,
and possibly
want to throw those
an appearance by Kami Claus in the prequel. Okay, well, so, you know, was there ever anything about, you know, that ending, you know, of the assassin living? Was there ever like some sort of a redemption that Santa was going to put him through, or was it always going to be that bloody ending of like, you know, you play like that, you're going to end up like that?
I mean, I think we had the philosophy on this one with our bad guy that he was so far gone, and that the redemptive qualities were given to Billy because he's so young that he could be probably scared straight or turned around, and there was a redemptive path for him because he's so young. He's not quite as far in as Skinny Man is. He hasn't personally killed anybody that we know of. He's he's threatened torture on a young lady, but he hasn't taken that extra step to be sort of to a point where you're not quite sure if he can come back. I think you feel like he's 12. He's a young man. He's out of control. There's a chance for his kid to come back.
He's almost about to kill his grandmother.
Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah, he's right on the precipice.
He's right on the precipice when Chris walks in, and he's basically like, "Hey, look, you're about ready to cross that line in a way that you don't want to cross."
But I don't think Chris. Look, I think Skinny Man, unfortunately, just was unrelenting, right? Like Chris has him down and is trying to get him to stop.
Yeah, he tries to get him to stop.
Even though he has him at his mercy, right? He's beating him, and Skinny Man.
For the podcast listeners and everybody, if you haven't seen the movie and you're somehow listening to the spoiler section, Skinny Man is their designation for the assassin.
Oh, right, yeah.
He really doesn't have a name until he's called out as John, I believe, in the movie.
Right. Jonathan Miller, I think he said.
Yeah, Jonathan Miller by Santa. So, yeah, no, okay, that makes sense. Did you always have Ruth kill him? Because I kind of like the way she doubles back, and I love the fact that she's using what looks like a flintlock musket pistol to kill him.
Yeah, I mean, and look, for us, like, she absolutely has the skills, right? Like, they've had to protect themselves many, many times before. So when Chris cracks open that old chest and you see the amalgam of guns there, that flintlock's in that box. But we just, so it's seated there, and then ultimately she grabs it. But
yeah, we like the idea of having her being very capable, because the amazing thing about Marianne as an actress is she's one of those rare people that can be an alpha or a badass and still have that warmth underneath. And yeah, she's just that rare person for us, that she hit everything we were after. And when because the whole thing for us was, she's going to be making cookies the whole movie. She needs to be the spine of this operation, and she needs to prop this guy up when he's down and bring him back and encourage him. But you also need to feel like she can handle herself, so that when she does have that moment at the end, you're like, okay, yeah, that makes sense, because she's kind of a badass,
Yeah, it was good the way she covered her tracks and scooted back. It was good. Sorry, what were you gonna say?
I said she's clever, that Miss Claus.
That's clever. Right. That's right. Well, so editing is the last stage of storytelling. What did you learn about your movie in the edit room? And tell us about this kind of like eclipse of you shutting down right as the pandemic was starting that you started to say earlier, and what it was like to do post for this movie during the pandemic.
It was frightening, because we're shooting in Ottawa, and like all the TVs were news stations, and everything was ablaze with the pandemic that was sort of crossing and taking over the planet. And everyone's like, we're shutting down everything. And that happened about a week before we actually stopped, or they actually shut everything down. But it was just like.
So you were shooting in February through March?
Yes.
Yeah, we finished in March.
Yeah.
So we started shooting in January, and then we shot through March. And we shot, 33 days or something.
Yeah. And it was
literally one day before.
A lot of anxiety because it was literally like for an entire week, they were like, they're shutting down any day now. They're shutting down any day now. And we just kept, we're just gonna keep shooting.
Did anyone get sick in the crew or the community you're at? Okay.
Well, the crazy thing about Ottawa is there was not one recorded case in Ottawa the entire time we were there. So that's one of the reasons we were just like, oh, well, we can just keep going until they shut us down. And that was exactly what happened. We just kept shooting. There never was a recorded case in Ottawa. We just kept shooting. And then finally they said, hey, we're shutting the whole country down just for safety.
And this would also mean that you can't get reshoots if you need them. So did you have everything you needed, or did you try and do reshoots later?
No, I mean, we got everything we needed, thankfully, knock on wood. But we knew our budget was so tight that if they shut us down, that was it. Like we did not have it all shot until the very last day. So it was like by the skin of our teeth that we finished the movie. And honestly, if we'd gotten shut down anything, we wouldn't have got that material. We'd had to try to figure it out without it.
And then what about post? I mean, ADR is a part of post, and people could do that remotely. They've been doing that for a few years, just even for things like TV commercials and voiceovers. Is that what you guys needed to do for your post?
So the editing, for ADR specifically, no, we just did a very COVID safe facility that abided by all the protocols. And so we were
here in LA.
Yeah, distance from them, and the actor would come in and do the line.
It was all very separated. Everyone's behind in a booth or in a distance of that to see each other, but it was all very we were 10 feet away from everybody at all times.
So we came back, we edited the movie in Ian's basement.
Really?
So
what were you editing on?
We do on Premiere.
Premiere, okay.
Yeah. So we do on Premiere, and we set up two, mirrored editing stations facing each other. So when Ian and I edit, we'll each take a scene. I'm like, okay, or we'll take a block. Ian will be like, oh, I'm doing scenes 1 through 5, and I'll be like, I'm doing 6 through 10. So we'll start editing on those scenes, and then when we get one done, we'll say, all right, hey, come over here, hop in my chair and take a look at this, and I'll hop in your chair and look at yours. And so we kind of do that. It's very similar to our writing process, in that we hand off the material.
That's
really cool. So how long did it take you to edit like that?
It's just about 3 months.
I think we had a rough cut within 2.5 months, and then then we did our own shoring up over the next 2 weeks, and then I think we did about 1.5 months after that of little where we'd send links to people and get feedback, and we would curate our edit like that, and then we spent about 1 month after that doing all of the post with the sound and the color. And
One thing that's kind of amazing is that once we'd gotten the movie where we wanted to, we showed it to Mel, and he watched it. He called us back, and he was very pleased, which is great, right? And he said, he was like, well, hey Mel, if you have any ideas or suggestions, feel free to toss them our way, right? He's like, okay, cool. I love the movie. I'm good with it right now. I'm like, okay, cool. So he called us 3 days later, or 2 days later, and he goes, okay, I've watched the movie 3 more times. I've got a couple things. Can I come over and we're like, oh yeah, we'll just write it. And first it's like, you want to hear him? I'm like, absolutely. Just, let's talk about it, or throw us an email. He goes, well, what if I just come over? And I'm like, okay, damn.
Wait, during the pandemic?
Yeah, for sure. But he already had it.
He'd already had it. So he got it in April, and then he was over the hump. He'd been fine for about a month. And he was like, you guys mind if I come over? And we're like, nah, I mean, we're just in my basement. So
I'm such a germaphobe. That would freak me out. But okay, I got it. But so
he already had the antibodies and everything.
Yeah,
still worried.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, so he came over, and what was his idea?
Well, he was like, let's just watch the movie through, and I'll shout out ideas. And what was awesome is he prefaced it with, you can take them or you can leave them. I like the movie how it is. So whatever you want here,
let's just try some things. Let's have some fun. So we sat down for 10 hours, and we went through the entire film, and just tried some stuff. And some things, were great. And we're like, oh, that's awesome. That was a smart idea. And some things were like, okay, that we went down the rabbit hole, and it fucked everything up. Okay, go back to
what was one of his ideas that you liked? Something that you just, because it is hard to see the forest without trees sometimes. So it's what was that idea?
For sure. I think there was a bunch of stuff where it was like, oh, hey, you could trim a little bit off of that. You don't really need to watch this person walk all the way down the steps. So I think we ended up snipping out 5 minutes or something like that.
Was there any like deleted scene that you want to tell us about that would like end up on a Blu-ray or something like
that? A couple amazing scenes that we loved that we had to cut. There was one,
and this was way before Mel came over.
This is before Mel came over. Mel was more in the tightening phase, and it was an amazing experience. Just to see what he thought, because he was literally like, what if we cut from this moment to this moment? And it was just really cool to see some of those moments back to back. And we kept a couple of them. They were great ideas. But what was the question on
especially the lead
scenes? Those lead scenes. Yep. There was one amazing moment where it just didn't work in the cut and didn't quite fit what we were after. But there's this, it was called the Mahjong scene. And it was Billy in a Mahjong parlor. And he took a call from Skinny Man when he says, all right, hey, I'm going to get on the road. And he's fiddling with that device, and the blade's coming out of it. And he's talking to Billy, and then you pick up with Billy as he's hanging up, and you realize he's in like a serious Mahjong parlor playing against adults. And he has his driver there sort of over his shoulder, and he's sort of, dominoes it. He's kind of like Mahjong, as they're making fun of him. Why don't you get off your phone, child? In Chinese, they're kind of riding him. And it just, we liked the link because it linked him to sort of Skinny Man's, sort of Asian fetishes. But it ended up feeling like something out of like Spy Kids 3. And we were just like, okay, that doesn't fit the movie we're after. It kind of is tipping into this, like little kid James Bond type thing, because he had this tux on, and it was funny and it was great as a standalone. But in the film, it didn't feel realistic. And we were just like, okay, we got to lose it.
Yeah. That's just what you do. You go through, you shoot stuff. A lot of stuff doesn't make it. But we put, there's like 6 or 7 scenes that come out on the disc, and whatever outlets offer special features. There's some stuff with Billy torturing his his housekeepers and stuff.
And it just ended up being 1 or 2 more notes than we really needed from him torturing people and being a little shit, even though they were really well done.
There's some stuff
by Chance. Chance did a great job. Yeah. He was great. The actors in it were great. It just ended up being a beat too many in some direction. So we stepped it back.
There's some stuff with Walton, doing some more harebrained things, which are funny. But ultimately, you're just looking at the whole movie.
Well, my favorite scene really was the end when he comes to Billy, and he has a really good monologue there where he's threatening him, and the way that you filmed it was really well done. In which he's lost his eye, he has this bandage. Mrs. Claus takes it off, Ruth takes it off, and he's in shadow, right? And I'm like, okay, maybe they just couldn't afford the special effect of it. That's a good way to film it. Like the shot was correct. And then like they get closer and closer, and then you do see like the gorged out eye that I guess is taking long to regenerate, and he gives like a serious threat down on Billy. It was a good monologue. It was a good monologue. I could almost see of like a vengeance movie like that. Like it could have like beyond like these people coming to Santa, I could have seen him going after kids for a whole movie as well.
Honestly, like that's kind of like where the sequel is headed. Like it's going to ramp up seriously. But I mean, look, this was very much our introduction as far as what we wanted to do with it, introduction to the character and the world, and kind of setting it all up. And if we get
tell me about that scene, because constructing that monologue was probably tough, because like it is not a long monologue, but it was, I don't know, I thought it was the sizzlingest dialogue of the film, and it was really good. And I could see why an actor like Gibson wanted to sign on for probably just that monologue alone. Even
I think the main inspiration for it was, one, it has to be a serious moment, a sort of a bit of scared straight for Billy. So we were really trying to get that character, Chris, to come in and lay it down. But I guess the other side of it, like where it was coming from, is like they have all these wonderful Norwegian or Norse myths of Santa being, a lot darker than the Coca-Cola one, where they have him literally like parents threatening their children, saying, hey, if you're not good, like, this guy's going to come around, he's going to snatch you up and kidnap you, and you're not going to be around. Or this guy's going to come and he's going to dole out some kind of punishment to you. Like those are built into those myths, which was kind of amazing, like to scare your kids straight, back in the 1400s, which we really liked. So that was kind of that moment for us, as we were trying to sort of weave in a little bit of that darker mythology and that darker side of that character, and maybe get to see where he kind of started and how far he'd fallen And now was a time for you to see what this man was actually starting, or how he started, and what he was made of, and like how he used to do it this way. You know, he used to go one kid at a time. But now, as hundreds of years in technology and, the urban spread, and there's just, he got into this sort of malaise, and everything just started falling off. And it became like this gift giving capitalist, money grab idea. And it was just fueling an economy. And now he's sitting in a really shitty place and realizes, how do I get myself out of this? And he goes back to basics. Was basically the answer.
Well, right. And I like when he's looking through the folders earlier and seeing, like, the kid that got the little kitchen for Christmas and became a chef, and the girl that got the fire truck and she became a firewoman. And, that's part of his regenerative powers as well. So that made sense as well. What was your toughest scene? That's always like a good place to end. What was the scene that you kept coming back to over and over on the page? It could be different for both of you, or maybe the same. And then what was your toughest scene shooting?
Writing wise, what do you think? Let's go writing first.
Gosh, I can't. I honestly. So
I'd say that
but the writing is this. Like, it took
14 years.
This is a 14-year genesis. So
how many drafts would you say it went through in 14 years?
Oh, hundreds. Probably
really okay.
We would rewrite it every year, with a fresh perspective from what we had learned that year, gleaned from that year, and then attack that one again, and then wait another year and we go, let's look at that Fatman script again. We look at it and sort of evolve it again.
Probably the biggest. Obviously, it's that scene that we sort of had to write halfway through production was probably the one that's most vividly in my mind, because we sort of had
most recent,
because we had to come up with it and try to layer in as much of the stuff that was in the film later and what we were trying to do with the character. And that was a new challenge. We've never had to do that before. We've never adjusted that much on the fly. That was a brand new moment for us. Like, usually it's like, oh, change the line, do this, do that. Oh, you don't have a toy store, you have a basement. Figure out how to run the scene in there. We'll find a dynamic that works. But this one was a complete sort of, okay, it's not this dynamic in anymore. It's this dynamic, because Walton is doing something he's doing something differently enough with the character that we really loved, that we didn't want to stray from what he was doing. We wanted to lean into it. And I think that we made a smart decision. But I just think that was probably the hardest thing, because we had to weigh all the stuff that was playing off of it later and make sure we weren't giving too much, make sure we weren't giving too little. And that was probably a tough one, because there are a couple of ADR lines in there we had to add while editing to sort of complete, the metamorphosis of that scene, to get everything we wanted, to get you enough information to get to those other scenes to feed out.
All right, that makes sense. And then what was your toughest scene directing? It could be logistic, it could be acting, it could be whatever you want.
I'll just say one thing. Like, this is a testament to Mel. Like, you were talking about that scene where he goes to see Billy and the lighting, how it shifts. There was like probably a half an inch sliver of light that he had to go find right there to just lean forward into it so perfectly. I don't know, Johnny Durango, our DP, who shot our last 4 movies, loves, like, he's like, Mel is amazing. He senses the light. He knows that he can walk right into it. So that was kind of amazing. I think the hardest sequence is the shootout. I mean,
it's the shootout because of logistics and how to plan it out. And I mean, the shootout in Small Town Crime was similar, though. We had so little money on Small Town Crime that we didn't have doubles of the cars, like, to shoot up. So you had to use like the same car you were blowing up, and you had to shoot it in certain order. So we would literally backtrack and shoot this, and then back up a little bit more and shoot this. And there were a couple of scenes we had to shoot with the windshield exploded and fix it in post, because we couldn't replace it. We didn't have the money or time to replace it. So, and there were things like that in this one where it was like, okay, we have to, that car that he lights up, like we had one shot at that one for time and for expenses. And those were the big challenges. You have one take on a lot of those. And you're just like, okay, whatever we get in this take is what we're going to have to use, or what we're going to have to try to, pump up in post if it doesn't go off. The explosion out of the barn was another one. It's something very simple, but we wanted to get it in one shot. So he walks away, he flips around the vehicle, and it explodes. But that was a little bit of a pain in the ass.
I remember
safety.
Like on the 4th day of that shootout, and we were running around trying to get a bunch of elements. We must have done 15 setups in an hour.
Yeah. I mean,
wow,
it was
great.
Insane. Like, because the sun was going down. And so we were literally just racing across the snow, like moving, like, 30 yards to find sun to match the continuity from the other stuff. So, and then like the whole stabbing through the body thing, like that mechanism, the knife blade out of his knee.
There's certain restrictions that you have to build things in. And it's like, you the idea was he pushes the button and it shoots out. He pushes the button and it comes back in. But you can't build something like that to actually use on set because it's a hazard and it could actually kill somebody. So they don't let you have a retractable blade. You have to do it manually.
Well, and then we had thought we had conceived it that it would just be spring loaded. So it'd be like, okay, like you put it on there and it spring goes in and goes out. Well, it came back that everyone was too worried about that because it might jam and da-da-da-da.
There's just a lot of things that could go wrong.
So now you're pivoting and you got a dummy out there and you're trying to articulate the dummy and like make it feel like it's struggling and you're running a blade through it.
And at some point you're just like, do I have 5 or 6 frames of this that could work that I could cut to just to get that sort of Cronenberg flash of something to cut and then pull back and we've gotten enough of it. So yeah, those were the types of challenges for that for sure. It was a challenge.
Was the factory shootout really hard? Because you keep talking about the one-on-one shootout, which was expertly choreographed and looked great. But I mean, the factory had a lot. Elves are running, military men are shooting.
But the hardest part of that was the elements that we added on top of it, like that wall of smoke that's coming out over, and like it takes so long to reset those things. It takes like 20 or 30 minutes at times, depending
just
on
to smoke out of the room
to evacuate the smoke. And you can't have any of it lingering because you'll get the set because it just reads so well on camera. You're like, you have to suck it all out, wait, okay, and now we're good to go. Johnny tells us, because we're not seeing the light being refracted through the smoke enough to see it, and then you can shoot it again. But yeah, getting that like smoke to come over and then timing it and having everybody, like we had to be in 4 or 5 different setups to get the smoke coming out over them, so it looked like it was coming like a wall. That took some patience.
Also, like when Walton has those 2 smoke bombs.
Oh God!
Like the way that had been rigged up was like there's 2 pins on each one. So Walton's sitting there holding them, and he can't hold the bombs. We thought they would just be like he lets go of the levers and they come up and they start smoking and he could throw them.
But they didn't.
That wasn't how those were made.
Yeah,
so Ian and I had to sit there on each side, just off camera, with some like wire on the pins, and it'd be like 3, 2, 1, and pull, and then Walton would hold them and then they go and
be like, yeah.
It looks smooth.
Yeah, no, Walton solves it. He solves the shit out of everything. He's such a beast.
No, that's awesome. Well, so what's next? What are you guys working on next?
Right now, we're working on putting a script together that we're really excited about. We're about a third way through it. That's the one thing we have in the sites right now. And then of course there's a bunch of stuff coming to us that we're reading. There's another project that we have that we've hopefully are setting up somewhere that, I can't get into it because it's not set up yet. You know how these things go.
Of course.
It's like, I'll announce something and then 2 weeks later, either the financing was or a COVID this or a what, it's always something somewhere. But yeah, we got some irons in the fire we're super excited about. Which one's going to go first? I'm not sure.
What's the title of the script you're working on now, if you're able to say?
I'll say it, man. It's Chicken Thief.
Chicken Thief?
Chicken Thief. And it's I guess you would say it's not necessarily sci-fi, but a fantastical horror film. It's an elevated fantastical horror film, or that's what we're aiming for anyway with it.
I mean, if you're stealing chickens, it's elevated just from the ground up. So
that's how it starts, Jeff.
Yes.
It blows up into a much bigger problem.
It always does, damn it. Look, Eshom, Ian, it was great having you guys again. I can't wait to see what you do next. Congrats on Fatman, and thanks for your time. Take it easy, you guys.
Thanks, brother. Thanks for having us, Jeff.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to co-writers, co-directors Ian and Eshom Nelms for coming down to chat about their latest film, Fatman. And remember, these were podcast listeners who made it into the podcast as guests. So it's always cool to support folks like that. So I hope you'll consider supporting their independent film, which they were so great to talk about today, Fatman. You could look it up anywhere you could rent a movie. It's available now. And it's definitely that strange holiday season movie that you've been jonesing for. And speaking of things to do while you're surfing around online, I hope you also consider checking out Backstory Magazine. That's right, you can find us over at backstory.net or via our iPad app entitled Backstory. You could read the free issue if you've never read us before. If you've subscribed in the past, I really hope you consider subscribing again to support us during the pandemic. We are just getting ready to publish our long-awaited issue 42, which is our quarantine issue. And there's really some amazing stuff in there that I've always wanted. I'm now the person slowing it down. I owe an article or two. I'm very low on sleep, so I'm trying to rush it all in. I might even publish it, knowing that a few of my articles are going to float in post-publish, which I do a lot of sometimes when we're just under deadline. So if you see an article that you want to read that's written by me and it says check back soon, it just means we're still getting it together. And that's right, old man Goldsmith slowed down the works, and I'm trying to steer clear of that. But look, it would mean the world to us to have you subscribe. You could use coupon code SAVE5, that's SAVE and then number 5. That'll save you $5 off a subscription. And we have a lot of cool stuff coming out in our pandemic issue 42. And so, look, you could read us on a desktop, laptop, our Backstory iPad app. So there's a lot of options if you want to read us, and it would mean the world to us to have your support. So thanks for considering. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2020. All rights reserved. If you want to reach out to me on social media, you can find me as Yo Goldsmith on Twitter, or Backstory_mag on Twitter is another great way to reach out to us as well. I have a Facebook fan page. I don't check it that often. I'm trying to make a note to check it once a week, but yeah. Facebook's courting with white supremacists and some of their other information manipulation has not been that impressive for me to watch so far. So I kind of haven't been on Facebook as much. I'm sure you understand. I'm on Yo Goldsmith on Instagram, and also Backstory_mag on Instagram. And we're going to start tweeting out art of the new issue, kind of like our splash pages, to just show you the beautiful art direction that we have. So that's kind of the way that I'm going to use Instagram for a while. But, there you have it. You could reach out to me anytime. I'm Jeff Goldsmith. I'm the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.